brings me to Blake here. I feel like we are kindred spirits. Blake, Regan? I should have asked. Regan, man.
Yes.
Pronunciation is hard. Works as a senior security engineer for Wesco International, where he focuses on Blue Team, improving enterprise security posture and automating Active Directory-related business processes with PowerShell. This is what the moment in reading your bio that I felt the kindred spiritness. I came from an admin world as well. Lots of Active Directory, lots of PowerShell, and excellent. All right. Prior to Wesco, Blake worked at Motorola Solutions as an engineer securing government and public safety land mobile radio systems. ITT Technical Institute in Oak Brook, Illinois, where you graduated with a bachelor's in information system security. You have a lot of letters after your name. I heard this GIAC. Is this like this is from the SANS company?
Yeah, you probably never heard of it.
Hi, everybody. Jeff McChucken, SANS instructor and author as well, by the way. So you hold a GCWN, SANS Security 505, securing Windows, GCIH, which is from SANS Security 504, hacker techniques, ethical hacking, Security Plus, Network Plus, and Project Plus. Prior to starting in InfoSec 10 years ago, Blake worked in building trades and ran his own remodeling business. He lives with a wife and daughter in Illinois. Sorry, his wife, his one and only wife. Didn't mean to imply otherwise.
My one and only.
One and only. And Blake's talk today is on limiting admin user risk in a Windows environment and other tips to avoid making the news, right? To avoid appearing like, hey, we are breached, and I know because I read Krebs on Security today, right? That is a bad way to wake up. So this is this ties in nicely to our last talk as well on, turns out admin users are users as well. It's right there in the name. And they just can result in a breach more quickly if they are compromised. So Blake, any questions for us? Are you ready to have us drop off audio and video and take it away?
So thanks for the great intro. That's a great, I feel overwhelmed there. I do have a link for the slides I'd like to share with folks. Sure. So if you want me to share it now.
Yeah, I'll click on any link you provide me.
No, I'll put the link. I'll send it to you real quick.
Okay. I will be your relay point as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, posting your slides on GitHub just before the talk. I am swooning over here.
Okay. All right. So yeah, if you don't need anything else, any other info, I'm ready to get started.
Excellent. All right. Wesley and I will drop off and take it away. Blake, thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, my name is Blake Regan, and my talk is limiting admin user risk in a Windows environment and other tips to avoid making the news. Thanks, Jeff, for the great intro. We can probably cut some time out of the presentation now. Two of the things that were covered in there, automation enthusiast. I love automating things with PowerShell. Many years back, a manager challenged me, said, hey, I'd like you to get into automation, so here's a project. Make an automated USB scanner out of a Raspberry Pi. And so we got a Raspberry Pi. I did the work on it. That is up on my GitHub, but that was a really fun experience. That kind of really opened some doors for me, new challenges. So, and also a serial learner, right? We all have to continue our education in this field. Threats are changing every day. New technologies are coming out. And in order to stay relevant, I found it to be important to continue your education, right? And that comes into training. I do have a couple certifications. I've got those through that constant learning, right? So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about unauthorized local administrator privileges. We're going to talk about managing local administrator credentials at scale. We're also going to talk about protecting administrative account hashes and credentials as best we can, right? We're talking about limiting that risk. We're also going to talk about weak password policies for administrative accounts and how to fix that. And then we're also going to talk about how to limit your risk from EFS ransomware. So just a disclaimer here, I am going to reference a couple scripts that these were things that I came up with to solve a problem in my day-to-day job, and I thought that they'd be beneficial for others to at least start that idea of how to accomplish it, right? So please run these scripts in a test environment before running them in production. There's no dangerous actions being taken by these, but that's just best practice, right? There's a lot of great information on GitHub. It's just always important to vet that information before putting it into your production environment. So unauthorized local administrator privileges. It's like breaking through a wall, right? It's unexpected, you don't want it, it can cause problems. So let's talk about some of those problems. So we have unapproved and dangerous software installation, right? A lot of software requires access to areas of the Windows operating system that only an administrator can have, right? So that's one of the things that you want to limit in a production environment. We're also going to talk about user compromise turns to instant privilege escalation. If that user that is an administrator is compromised, that eliminates one step from, that kill chain that the attacker has to take in order to get to their objective, right? They got local admin right away. So we're also going to talk about just improved configuration changes. Maintaining a baseline in an environment is very important, and when an unauthorized user gets administrative privileges, they can make changes that may deviate from your acceptable risk baseline, or just cause production issues, right? And that's a bad day for everybody. And then insider threat. Unfortunately, there are those situations where someone who is trusted has elevated access and does take advantage of that. Many instances in the past, you could just check the news, and there's many, many more. This isn't an all-encompassing list of risks, right? So how do we detect this? How do we detect this unauthorized local administrator access? So one of the ways that we can do this is by keeping a management system, a records management. You put in a request, the request gets approved, you either get the access for the consultant, for the project, for yourself, or it gets denied, right? But the idea behind that is it's recorded, and now there's a baseline that if there is an incident, you can go back and check. Hey, did we actually, what were we thinking when we said that this was okay? Or no, we have no record, right? That can kind of help fill in some of those blanks in the event of an incident. And it's important to have that information at the very start, right? Kind of track down how did something happen. We can also use our SIEM, our Security Information Event Manager, by creating an alert for event 4732, Windows Event ID, that a member was added to a security enabled group. So now across, if you have a domain, whether you have 50 servers or you have 50,000 servers, now you're letting that SIEM do that work for you instead of checking each server every day. That's not a task anybody wants to do. Now you can get alerted when that privilege escalation happens. You can get tipped off, and you can either go check your record system and say, do I have a record for this and I just didn't know about it? Or is this something that is not expected, right? A lot of environments do not have a SIEM, and that's okay. There's PowerShell to the rescue. I created a script that can go out and query members of a domain, servers, workstations, and using WMI, that accounts for older PowerShell versions or older operating systems, to query the members of the groups that you specify, right? So now we can have this baseline. We can identify what's going on in our environment. And the other step that comes with this is holding people accountable, right? In your, whether you're an enterprise environment or a standalone environment, trying to understand what was the reasoning why an account or a user was granted administrative access. If it's just so that someone can log on to a server and giving them admin access, that's not the best way to do it, right? So it's creating that culture of accountability and security, from the sysadmin, from the administrator level, domain admin, and then all the way up through leadership, right? And that'll create that bond that's very important, when maintaining defenses for an environment. So you will find that if you start generating events on account was added to a security enabled group and you start asking people why this is happening, you may get some pushback, right? But that's part of building that culture of accountability and understanding the risk that comes from that, right? So let's use a little scenario here. This is referencing my get local membership domain script. So we see that when we run this is just a test environment. So we have 2 servers here, but we can see we have a whole bunch of accounts that are local administrators. Some of these may be known. We even have the domain controller as a local admin on the server. That's not a good thing, but this helps us get that baseline, right? You can't protect what you don't know. So using this baseline, you now have a foundation to do cleanup, to use for incident response, and then also for audits, right? A lot of times if your organization is subject to audits, you may need to prove principle of least privilege, right? Using this baseline can help with that. So let's look at an example scenario. Now this, I believe, is a bug in the Windows operating system, right? Where if a user is named $, you know, if you see here, we said, show me the net users, right? And you can see that $, does not appear on this list. And so, and that's right here, sorry. So that may be something that would get missed. A lot of times administrators do things via command line because it's faster, it's easier. But as we can see here, that if we view local users and groups via the GUI, we can see that $, account, right? And if we check the local administrators group on that host, we see that $, is a local admin on this host, along with other accounts here. And so now when we run this script again and we compare against our baseline, we see that we have a deviation, right? So we need to look into this. And that's where, coming back to our CRM or our security request form management, can say, hey, do we have a record for this? No, we don't. Okay. Did you add this? Do we have a SIME alert for this? Well, luckily, if we set up the SIME alert, we will have one. And we can see the actual time. We can start to get some of that telemetry data, right? The time, the account that was used to add that $, account to local administrators, and other information, right? But now we have that chronicled over time, where even if this wasn't a malicious incident, we now have this pattern that we can establish, right? Instead of trying to remember, oh, I think I saw this account here, but I don't remember if it's supposed to be there. So one of the ways that we can remediate this is to use restricted groups in a domain environment. Now, this is a good solution to maintain a baseline of approved accounts that are supposed to be enabled on a particular set of servers or organizational unit or even workstations. And every policy enforcement, what happens is this restricted group will refresh the list of members that are supposed to be there. So if we go back to our incident where we had get added that wasn't supposed to be, that isn't a member of restricted groups policy, that'll get cleaned up at policy enforcement. Okay, and my mouse died here, so we're gonna off-road a bit. So how do we remediate this? We talked about our policy. So in the last slide, we created our restricted group policy, and you can see that before we apply the policy, we still have $. We have some other accounts. We have Bob, Tech9, controllers with the domain controller. When we run that policy enforcement, now we're cleaning up that list. Now we're only having the local administrator that will always be there. And then we will have domain administrators, which there's different theories on that being in local admin, but now you can see we've cleaned up our baseline, right? So just going back over remediation, you can also do this for remote desktop users. Very often, a user gets added to local administrators just so that they can log on to the machine or check some things out. That's dangerous, right? you can add those people to those accounts to remote desktop users using the restricted group policy again. And that allows you that if you have to remove that access, whether we have 50 or 50,000 servers, that if we're doing it through group policy, we now don't have to touch every single server to do that. We can do this at scale using our policies here. And so we can see here that remote desktop users has no members before we apply our policy, and then afterwards, we now have our limited access group. And then to remove it, like I mentioned, you remove it from the policy updates, no more access on the server, right? So, and this is just coming back to our get local membership domain. I configured it to look for local administrators and local remote desktop user rights. So that's just showing here the remote desktop. If you like this idea, you can go modify this, look for any group that you want to. The script also does have PowerShell commandlets to look for users, but a lot of times in environments, the PowerShell versions may not be up to date. So WMI may be a better way to do that. So let's say you like this idea of restricted groups. There are some no-nos for restricted groups. Do not apply restricted group administrators to domain controllers. And the reason for this is the administrator on a domain controller, or the built-in administrator, is de facto domain administrator, and also runs a system when you connect to other hosts. So it makes it very hard to detect what actions were taken by a user running that way. And so just showing here that's instant privilege escalation. So just be careful with this and do this in a test environment. If this is something that could be very helpful to you, test it out in your test environment. The other thing to think about is that if you modify here, you can add users in this section here, and it will not overwrite the currently enabled users in that group. If you use this option up here, this will wipe out everything that is in that group and apply what's in here. So again, be careful with it. It's a great way to limit that risk, but you need to check it out in your test environment first. So now we're going to talk about managing local administrator account credentials at scale, also known as LAPS. LAPS does have its shortcomings, but it is better than having the same account password on every single host as administrator in your environment. There's also another way to do this. Jason Fossen has documented a way to do this with PowerShell Protect CMS message. And the benefit of this method is that it can be used in a non-domain environment. So that's one of the caveats of LAPS, is that it requires a domain. And so that kind of leaves out a large scope of systems, that can have this feature applied to it. So some of the risks of having the same credential on all the hosts in your environment for local administrator are if that hash is compromised. Popular tools like Responder, using LLMNR or NetBIOS Relay can get that hash, can actually get authentication to happen and send to the attacker and get that hash, okay? And now that we have that hash, we can either pass that hash or we can crack the hash. A great tool by Marcello Salvati is CrackMapExec. It's a very common way to pass the hash. There's also some PowerShell versions out there, invoke the hash. But again, that's that danger, right? And we want to eliminate that. So, and what does LAPS do? LAPS differs that credential on all of the hosts in the environment that it's applied to. So there's a unique password for every host. Because Windows does not salt the hashes for passwords, if I have the same password that you have, our hashes are identical. But if it's in a Linux operating system, they have a salt, and that makes the same password hash different for as long as you don't get a hold of the salt for different users. So a couple things that you can do here, right, is deploying the LAPS in the domain environment. That's going to help to solve that issue. LAPS has some built-in functions that can help you for delegating permissions or building that into your role-based access controls, right? So different levels of access need can be applied to different organizational units of servers based on sensitivity level. So I know that sounded like a bunch of complex words, but really you can grant access to the people that need access to those credentials and then denying access to those individuals who do not, right? So tips and tricks for LAPS. I struggled with this last year, and a couple of things that I came up with and successfully completing that struggle were to rename the local administrator account via group policy that LAPS is going to manage. Now that doesn't, it just makes things more difficult for an attacker to enumerate, right? The RID will stay the same, but the name will be different, right? And so then we're looking about to assign LAPS to manage that new account name. That's what we're talking about there. Renaming the local guest account via group policy. If you're going to take the time and invest in deploying LAPS to your environment, also take the time to make sure that the guest account is renamed, and then also disable that account if it's not already. Disable via group policy, right? This was something that was a little puzzling to me. So deployed LAPS in the environment, all of the servers were reporting values, but when you went to go use that password, it wouldn't authenticate. And so going back, checking over all the settings, everything was good. I found a post, I believe it was on Stack Overflow, where someone said when they force reset the password for the LAPS client, that the password synced and then the password was able to authenticate. And so that ended up being the case. And if you see here on this screenshot here, if you deploy LAPS or you have in the past and it didn't work for you, you saw this timestamp here. This means that there's no password expiration set because those values haven't synced up on the host yet, and authentication will not be possible. So to fix that at scale, right, I came up with a simple script to target the organizational unit where my servers existed, and then using the command to with the appropriate permissions to force reset the password, I was able to force reset the password on all of the hosts, and then all the credentials synced and started working again. This was a huge relief. We had a red team exercise coming up. LAPS wasn't working, but by persevering and reaching out into the community and looking for information, it was very hard to find this. I don't think it was because people weren't sharing it. It's just very obscure, and surprise, surprise, is not documented in any Microsoft documentation. But I digress. And so, are there some downfalls to LAPS? It can be viewed that way. All right, the LAPS values are encrypted in transit, but not at rest. So when the admin password DLL is communicating between the domain controller and the host, that communication is encrypted. But at rest, those values are in clear text, with the caveat that the account has been delegated the privileges to view those values. Okay, so there are some controls in there. There's some Active Directory magic that's going on to manage those extended rights. But if you're viewing information through a third-party LDAP viewer tool, that attribute will be shown in clear text because it's not being encrypted in transit between the communication between the DLL. So that could be inadvertent information disclosure. So how can we solve that? Well, we can use packet encryption in the Windows domain environment. We can use IPsec with null encapsulation, which I know that sounds complicated, but basically it's just using Kerberos and IPsec to generate a secure connection between the client and the target, right? And so is there a better way to do this? Possibly, definitely for environments that are not on a domain. Jason Fossen documented this. So the credentials are stored in a certificate encrypted file on the host, and that certificate can come from a CA or a self-signed cert. The password gets encrypted with a public key on the host or network share. So if the attacker gets that public key, that's not the end of the world, because it's the private key that matters. And then those passwords get decrypted with a private key that can be stored on a smart card. And then you use a scheduled task that handles the cadence of the password update, running the script to do this, and then archiving it on a network share. I realize I'm running a little behind on time, so I'm gonna. And the best part is it does not require a domain to use. So for a lot of ICS and OT environments that are not on a domain, or some segments are not, this may be a solution for you. And as you can see here, just encrypts the, it names with the host, the account name, the timestamp, and then the thumbprint certificate, so that when you're going back to uncover this credential, you know which certificate is needed to access this. You can also use RBAC here if you use different certificates to encrypt different levels of credentials, and then you control the access to those private keys for your staff. You can then also kind of balance in some role-based access control there. So protected users. This is really important. Protected users in the Windows domain environment has some major protections for Active Directory side for accounts, and then on the client side for accounts. So the main things are restricting the use of NTLM authentication. So that will break past the hash for NTLM. Also restricts the use of DES or RC4 for Kerberos pre-authentication. So a lot of older protocols may not work when you have an account in protected users. But the main benefit is the restricts the use of Kerberos delegation. So you definitely don't want to have your domain administrators or your account operators be delegated to authenticate to different services, right? Protected users kind of puts the brakes on that. And then the Kerberos TGT, ticket granting ticket, cannot be renewed. You have to request a new ticket granting ticket. So if you are able to steal a ticket or forge a ticket, that ticket can't be renewed. It has to be created from scratch. So that kind of adds another protection there. And then the biggest thing about protected users is eliminates the caching of plain text credentials for CredSSP and WDigest. So the downfall to that is it will break offline sign-in. But again, you don't want to have your administrative users be able to sign in offline on any kind of device. Also, LDAP and NTLM authentication will no longer work. So what? It's kind of a big deal because a lot of technologies use LDAP and NTLM authentication. So looking at protected users, you really need to take a approach of a small test group and then monitoring and kind of increasing the scope of that, because there may be some things that break that you don't know or won't expect. So definitely important to take small steps there. One interesting thing is TACX Plus for administrative access on Cisco devices ends up using RC4 for Kerberos pre-authentication. Now TACX Plus is a 20-plus-year-old protocol. Maybe it's time to move on from that. I don't know. That's something to think about there. Weak password policies for administrative accounts and non-admin accounts. So the problem here is that with LAN-MAN authentication is an older protocol. You take the password clever in lowercase. So what happens is LAN-MAN converts that password to all uppercase, and then it splits that, it pads it to 14 characters, and then it splits that password into 2 7-character chunks. Right, so if anybody that has password policies where they say, well, we have 10, we only require 10 characters. Guess what? LAN-MAN hashes can still be stored on devices, and they're very easy to crack. The last part about LAN-MAN is that it uses those 2 chunks and then uses a DES encryption method to bring those hashes together. I didn't do the best job explaining it, but that's why I provided the slides. So, and that's the thing I mentioned before, Windows hashes lack a salt. So again, that one password hash for a user is the same for another user with the same password. So as you can see here, using Hashcat, I was able to crack this hash in 1 second. So it really focuses on the need for length over complexity. And so the downfalls of a Windows domain default password policy is that there's some limitations on what you can enforce. And as you see here, here's a screenshot, 14 characters. I think the default, if you install Active Directory, is 7 characters right now. That's still the default. Weak password policies for administrative accounts. The solution here is to use fine-grained password policies. A lot of people may not know about this. This is accessible through Active Directory Administration Center, which comes with your remote server administration tools. And then these screenshots here will show you how to access that. But the benefit of that fine-grained password policy is we have the option to say, if my admin account, keep it locked out until an administrator manually unlocks the account. Enforce account lockout policy. For admin accounts, you definitely want to have manual intervention needed to unlock this account. For user accounts, it may be based differently on your risk model here. But the minimum here, I would say minimum is 20 characters for passwords for administrative users, and for your regular users, at least 16. If we remember, landman hashes are 14, can only compute a hash with 14 characters. So if you take it a step further to that 16, you're still having that complexity, right? And so, unfortunately, I ran over talking about a couple things. So just reviewing here. And these are all on the slides, folks. One of the last things that we can do is use password spraying in our domain to identify weak passwords, right? And so there's a tool written by Bo Bullock from Black Hills Information Security called Domain Password Spray. Again, use this tool in a test domain first, but this can help you find passwords like summer 2020 exclamation point.
Blake,
it is good as a
we have 15 minutes.
Password spray yourself often.
Blake, just so you know, we have 15 minutes of buffer for Q&A. You don't have to fly through these slides. You're okay.
Okay, I appreciate it. I was going for the 30 minutes, so let me just step back here. Thank you. So as we see here in this slide, we have our fine-grained password policies that we created. We created one for administrative users, and then we created one for just regular users. And so you can see that this tool will pick up those policies and looks at our lockout threshold, the password length. So it's identifying that we have different password policies applied, right? And by doing this password spraying, right, the password was password, this is for example, but it will identify the different accounts that you have here. So we've got Tyler Durden, Lazarus Group, SecMoto, all were using the password of password. So now we either know that we need to change these passwords if we're doing this as a blue team exercise, or if we're doing this as a red team exercise, we now know that we have some access that we can use, right, to do further enumeration. And so that's the power of that. It's great. It's one of those things related to password policies. Right now, I know the future of authentication is going to passwordless, but until greater strides can be made in usability and applicability, we'll be using passwords for some time, right? So, and passwords are like underpants. Change them often, keep them private, and don't share them with anyone. So, kind of wrapping it up, limiting risk from EFS ransomware. This is also something that I picked up in my SEC 505 class, and I just thought it was amazing. Thought it was so smart. So EFS, or encrypting file system, is built into Windows, okay? And it uses a certificate to the private key, or sorry, the public key of a certificate to encrypt files. So only the private key can decrypt that. So think about that. if an attacker was able to get access into your environment and escalate to the domain or enterprise admin level access, they can now take and use that built-in EFS function against you and ransom and lock up your system, right? It can even be done with a key that's created outside of the environment and imported as a string of characters. Once that private key is gone, you can't decrypt those files unless you have an EFS Recovery Agent key set up. And so what that does is creates in a policy using a certificate that when the EFS mechanism goes to encrypt files, that private key that is used is encrypted with the public key of the EFS Recovery Agent. So now, if you have the private key to the EFS Recovery Agent, you could have recourse to decrypt your files that an attacker tried to use EFS ransomware. That's something to think about. Even if you don't use EFS in your environment, it is good to check and make sure that you have a recovery agent set up. The caveat to this is you must have that private key, store that offline, put it on a smart card, put it in a safe. It may never be used, but in the event that it's needed, I mean, how awesome, what a great feeling and what a great outcome that would be that, you know, you prevented that. And so, closing thoughts, what do we say to the God of death? We say not today, right? Limiting risk as much as we can in our environments is very important. I think we know or are learning you can never be 100% secure, and even the most elite and mature organizations can be compromised. It happens, right? The important thing is to have that baseline of access, that baseline of your systems, limiting that risk, strong password policies. Now, I know that it's not the end-all be-all solution, but it really can help to mitigate that risk on a very large scale. And these are easy wins to say to upper management and, you know, infrastructure and say, listen, this is what we want. This is the problem we have. This is what we want to do. It takes some testing and cooperation to get there, but it's such a better place to be than just having, you know, the same password for all local admin accounts on servers and password policies under 20 characters for administrative users. There's so many other things, right? Some acknowledgements here. I'd like to give acknowledgement to Jason Fossen. You can find his information at blueteampowershell.com. Also, Black Hills Information Security. When I really started getting focused on information security, that was has been and is a great resource for people new to information security and advanced people. Also, Bo Bullock, DAVTAC with the domain password spray. And then also Tyrone E. Wilson from Cover 6 Solutions. Tyrone was my mentor for the presentation and really gave me some great feedback, and just giving him acknowledgement there. Nice to meet another person in the community. We also both play hockey, so that's, you know, it's cool to meet another hockey player. And I'd like to say thank you to GRIMM and Scythe for the opportunity to present. I think it's great to create a community where people can share information and share different ideas in kind of an open way and just collaborate. This is my first major talk to a large audience, and it's been a great experience working with Tyrone and GRIMM and Scythe to get prepared. If you want to connect, I have a GitHub, LinkedIn, and on Twitter, I go by the handle Blake_R38. I think the first handle I went to pick out was taken, so I just used the next one there. So I really appreciate the time, and I look forward to watching the other events and hoping that 2021 is a much better year for all of us. I know that it's been difficult, and just looking forward to a brighter year next year. So thank you very much.
Well done, Blake. Nicely done. Thank you. That was an amazing talk. Perspective. Again, I came from blue team ops. I'm now on the red team, and literally yesterday, I presented a report to the client where even up to the executive summary, the example path I gave was, hi, if the attacker gains access via phishing, which it almost always is, almost always they'll have limited user access. Unless there's some way to get local admin, that's a significant time sink for attackers. They don't always have to get local admin, but it's always useful. And the single fastest path to failure as a defender is having sets of computers with the same local administrative credentials. Let me say that again. The single fastest path to failure as a defender is having the same local administrator or administrative credentials across multiple machines. Another path I used with that exact same client, the report delivered yesterday, was one random admin machine with authenticated users in the remote desktop users group. So anybody across any domain that has any trust could log into that box. I log in, I'm a limited user. Oh no. But the local administrator password that was shared on public file shares lets me escalate. And hey, look, there's a domain admin logged in. Right? That was from limited user to domain admin in 2 steps, right? Log in and log in again with local administrator credentials. So please, this happens. I love your talk, actionable advice, and this is where a lot of attackers look, both pen testers, red teamers, and real world attackers. So I cannot give this a strong enough endorsement. I love laps as well. I did share a couple extra links of just setting up laps, so it's not terribly surprising. Doing a lab environment first so you know what's going to happen. Thank you for talking about what happens with the protected users group in terms of like TACACs. I hadn't seen that before. Right? Most of the repercussions for admins, they don't care if they can't log in if the domain's unavailable because they're a friggin' domain admin. They're there to admin the domain. So it's not usually relevant. But yes, thank you for showing the possible downsides of protected users as well. Ghost mentions abusing trust issues with bad security practices and responder is my thing. Yeah, if you want to get into that, you can disable link local management name resolution protocol, LLMNR. You can disable NetBIOS for name resolution. Both are default, right? Before giving up on a DNS name, Windows will say, hey, anybody, have you heard of that old SCCM server? That's what I'm looking for. Responder's like, I'll respond to that. That's totally me. Connect to me, please. And you can either relay or crack credentials from there. Yeah. Thank you. That was fantastic talk. I'm glad to see you at GrimmCon, and I will happily attend your talks at future events because this should not be your one and only step into presenting. You did a great job, Blake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions or comments, Wesley?
Oh man, no, the great presentation. You know, something that can be added on to this as far as just another presentation is that, you know, for people like Jeff, you and me, this makes perfect sense. You know, this is definitely something that we can see, we can visualize, we see it done. But, you know, I'll be interested to see how will you report this to somebody, you know, who may not have this type of in-depth knowledge and everything. And like I said, this may be a presentation I did because this is all great. We understand this from that technical level, but hey, how do you take this and put it into a word that, hey, you know?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Somebody can actually understand. Like, you know what? I need to fix this right now. That's the biggest thing. And let's see, these are some talks ideas that can definitely come throughout the next GrimmCon or wherever conference because these are things that people like me, Jeff, and anybody who's been in this field struggle with, is trying to communicate this up so that they understand, like, you know what, this is an action, this needs to be fixed. So definitely something to think about. You know, if you have any ideas on how you present that, how you put it in a language, or how do you influence somebody to take action on this? Great presentation idea.
So as an aside on that, I just literally pulled up the pen test report, and it's nice to start off with basic, kind of orient your audience. So my first sentence for the finding about multiple computers with the same local admin password: domain credentials are nicely centrally managed inside of Active Directory. However, each domain join also has its own local credentials that are separately managed. Because there's a lack of visibility, that's where security problems fester. So increasing that visibility is a huge thing. So I said, commonly a lack of configuration management on those local accounts are a source of security-related issues. For example, using the same local administrator password across multiple machines allows, by default, attacker who gains control of any one computer to control all other computers with the same password. I'm not hedging my phrasing there, but that's huge. And I go into specifics, but make the complex simple and orient your audience to the idea quickly, so that you can then talk into specifics, but start from very general is common advice there for a finding itself. So that was awesome, Blake. I shared your links inside of the Noobs Track channel inside of Discord. You did reach out to me on Discord, so I assume.
I'll be on Discord. I'll answer questions if people have questions. You know, it's great, and thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to learning from the other presenters. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you at future conferences as well.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, Wesley.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Back powers from you.
All right.
Yeah, get that local admin back.
Yeah,
Right.
We're not to the point of sharing root passwords yet, Blake. Sorry.
Yeah.